My name's Rick Bloodworth. This is the Common Sense Christian Financial Channel. Today is Tuesday, February the 17th, a little bit after 3 o'clock Central Standard Time. So the futures market has about an hour left to go today. The silver market went down a little bit. It wasn't really bad. There wasn't a great deal of volume on it, but a little bit more than we have had. But anyway, the silver market opened at about $76.54. It went as low as $71.86, and it's been as high as $77.02. And right now, with about an hour left in the market, it's about $73.20 some odd cents. So down about $3, a little bit of change with that, and so we're down about 4% for the day. And so I thought I would just kind of bring everybody up to date on where we are. I really thought I would stress a little bit more of the channel that we seem to have been in for the last week or two, because it is starting to get settled in fairly nicely with pretty good support at 70.86, and certainly the 90.51 top range hasn't been challenged yet. And so right now, this is the point to watch. If it drops below $70.86 and it stays there for a couple of days, well, then we may have another downward leg to go. But if it maintains price above this level and it starts to rise a little bit, then we're at least going to be continuing in the range, if not having an opportunity to break out a little bit. So just keep an eye on this. As you know, I do not predict prices. I don't think it's very productive. I've never seen anybody that's very good at predicting prices in the short term. I do think that we can say that there's good fundamentals in place for the supply-demand that have not really changed. The manufacturers that need the silver still need the silver. We still are in a structural deficit as far as our annual mining supply at about 830 million, combined with our annual recycling at about 200 million, is still about 100 million ounces below what we need each year. And so that structural deficit could continue to widen. And I believe this last year, especially towards the end of last year, the beginning of this year, they started having a little bit of trouble sourcing the silver that they needed or thought they would need. And so we saw a pretty good price explosion in December and January. That was purely market driven. It was not the retail side, it was the industrial side and the sovereigns. And so we've had some really good demand. That has not seemed to shift any recently. If it does, obviously that can cause the prices to go down pretty quick. But if it doesn't, with us being in a deficit, well, just the natural supply demand that we have right now could force prices up over the medium term. So keep an eye on all this. This is kind of interesting to watch when we get into a range like this. It does help you if you like to trade stocks, for example, to maybe know where a good entry point is and where a good exit point is. But again, that's more for day traders, or at least short-term traders. And let me just make a point on that as well. When we went way down this morning and we tested this line, I went ahead and started dipping my toe back into the mining stocks. And there was really a reason for that was more than just getting at the bottom of the range. I had sold pretty much on Thursday to get out and wait for the volatility that I felt like could come this week with the China market being closed. I still feel like we could have some pretty good volatility, and I think they could certainly test the lower part and drive it lower. But we've got some other factors involved. Hecla Mining will be reporting their fourth quarter earnings after the bell today. May have already reported it by the time that you see this, and so you'll have an idea on that. But it does seem like the miners have some reason for optimism as far as their fourth quarter results and looking into the future. And so I felt like that could be a positive for the stocks in the mining sector. And so I just bought a little bit. I've maybe about a third of the position that I would normally hold when it was down this low. And again, I just hated to not have at least some presence with them reporting the earnings when I knew that these earnings very likely could be something that were more positive than they've been in a number of years. And so that's my thinking on that. Pay attention to this range. Right now, we're still pretty close to the lower part of it. $73.22 is just about $2.40 above our support line. And so we're not too far from that. And so I figured I would go ahead and do that. I'm not recommending that you do that by any stretch of the imagination. Everybody has to look at their own situation, their own circumstances, and determine what they're comfortable with. I would never invest in a mining stock where I wasn't aware of the possibility that I could lose the entire investment. And so neither should you on that. But again, that's what I'm doing. I still have the vast amount of my holdings in the physical market. Most of that is in savings. It's an insurance account. My wife and I retired about 3 years ago, and so we have that silver savings in place to where we can help make ends meet should that need ever arise. Now, as far as the volume today, so far with an hour left on the closing, the March contract, the front-end contract, had about 70,000 contracts traded today, which isn't all that high by any stretch of the imagination for the last 2 months, but it's higher than it's been at least in the last day or two. And so that also, though, I believe includes yesterday's activity. Even though the stock market was closed yesterday, there was an abbreviated session on the futures market, and it only traded like 15,000 contracts, but they did not report anything this morning for February the 16th, and so I believe they're going to report all that at one time tomorrow, and so we'll know what the overall volume is, but keep in mind that very likely we're reporting 2 days worth, even though one of those days is abbreviated. I did want to bring one thing to your attention. We've been looking at that March contract and the number of outstanding contracts on Monday. I pointed out that we had about 58,770 contracts is what they had shown, and then today they had changed that to 58,584 contracts. I don't know where that other 186 contracts came from. I've never seen them change that before. Maybe it had something to do with the holiday, but right now we've still got about 293 million ounces worth of contracts, about 58,500 contracts outstanding for the March delivery. And so should that remain at that level, I think that it'll get more and more interesting as the first day of the intent to take delivery approaches, which is February 27th. And remember, for each delivery month, they can deliver all the way through that month. So February 27th isn't the end, it's the beginning of it all. But February 27th, I believe, will show us a little bit of a glimpse as far as how much demand there is going to be on this March contract. And if it's a great demand, well, that could push prices up. If it turns out to be a non-event, that could push prices down. A number of people have been looking for what they have called a default or a cash settlement on the March delivery contract. I doubt very seriously if that's going to happen, but it could. Anything is possible. And one thing we have seen in the last 6 months, and especially the last 2 months, is we are having things happen that have never happened before, at least not on this scale. I believe David Morgan pointed out that there was something called Silver Thursday back in 1980, where the market actually dropped a higher percentage than it did on our Black Friday, January the 30th, when it dropped over $30, $45 spread for the day. But back in 1980, the prices were lower, and certainly it was not nearly as large in terms of a nominal dollar amount. There is still quite a supply-demand struggle going on right now. And so this March contract could in fact be something that's fairly interesting. But again, I wouldn't be looking for a cash settlement on that particular month. They have a way of making sure they bring in whatever silver they need to bring in. And in fact, we're at levels that are pretty elevated from what they have been in years gone by. However, the reason we're at elevated levels, I think we're at about 100 million I think maybe 93 million now as far as the registered category. And while that's a very high number historically, because there are so many deliveries taking place in recent months, it's not necessarily that high from a percentage perspective. And so there's a lot of factors that go into that. For those of us in the stacking community, it really is just noise. If you don't have to sell and you don't want to sell, the activity that's going on right now shouldn't bother you. As a matter of fact, if you're kind of in the middle of your stacking process or even at the beginning, you should be rooting for lower prices. I know it doesn't feel as good to have a smaller balance sheet, but it is so much nicer to be able to buy silver at a lower price than it is a higher price. My wife and I did this for decades, and I don't remember one time the market going down and thinking that somehow we had lost money, because we were just saving in silver. We were looking at number of ounces, not at whatever the balance sheet said it was in dollar terms, because we weren't saving silver for dollar terms. We were saving it for different purposes. And so if you're just stacking right now, if you don't need to sell, don't get too concerned, and don't be worried if there are manipulations being done in this market. That's been going on as long as I've been involved with it, and I've been involved with it for 45 years now. It's just a fact of life, and so don't get too concerned about that. Obviously, if you have to sell or if you'd like to sell right now, then that can be a little bit aggravating, but you know that it occurs, so just make your decisions adjusted upon those occurrences. Anyway, that's where we're at right now. That's probably about as good of a market update as we can have. I've had several that have questioned as far as borrowing in silver right now. I think Johnny Bravo has talked about that. Instead of going out and selling your silver and buying something outright, just putting your silver as collateral. And a lot of people have wondered why I haven't talked about that. And there's really several reasons for that. The first is my master's degree is in finance and economics. And so I've studied a lot when it comes to finances. And I have determined many years ago that while a lot of really smart people use borrowed funds in order to increase their assets, they often have their assets that are leveraged in such a way turn in a direction that they didn't think was ever going to happen. And when it did, they had a margin call not from the market but from their banker, because they no longer had as much collateral as they did when they first took out that loan. And so I'm dead averse from that perspective, because I know how quickly the market can change sometime. And having invested in silver for 45 years, I don't know of any market other than maybe Bitcoin that can rise and fall quite as quickly as silver does. So I think you're taking a bit of a risk should you do that. If you are in the Johnny Bravo type of income bracket, well, you can afford to put your silver up as margin for whatever loans you're taking out. And it may even make sense for you where you're at. One of the other reasons I don't recommend it is because I'm retired now. And so I don't buy anything that I can't afford to pay for. The idea of taking out a loan to me after I'm retired is very risky. And so I'm not going to do it right now. But when I had a job, when I had a regular income coming in, I borrowed on a number of occasions, and sometimes made things a little bit difficult. By having done so, we didn't hesitate to borrow if we needed to, and like I say, that was different. We had an income that would support paying back a loan. Right now, the only income that we have is Social Security that's on a regular basis, and so to take out a loan for us and put our silver up as security, well, that would just be financial suicide in my mind for a retired person. So that's the second reason I really haven't talked about it. And the third reason is my background in real estate. I was a real estate appraiser for 13 years. When I began in 1982, the market in Casper, Wyoming, where I had appraised at, had just finished a boom cycle in oil, and it was just beginning a bust cycle. And I watched real estate fall literally 40 to 60% in value. And because of that, a lot of people got hurt. A lot of people lost their businesses that they had pledged against that house. And so I just watched a lot of people that that made a mistake because they thought real estate could only go up, and they found out that in fact it could go down, and it could go down in a hurry. Usually if somebody's going to pledge their silver for a big loan, it's going to be for real estate. Not always, but very often that's what they're doing it for. And real estate's very risky. I realize that in the long run, real estate rises, and it certainly rises in keeping with inflation, because real estate, like silver and gold, is real. It's something that does not deteriorate very rapidly. But there are times where real estate can plunge in a hurry, and if you have pledged your silver against that real estate and your loan officer calls you up and says you're going to have to either put more silver in for a pledge against this loan, or you're going to have to sell some of your silver to pay for it, well, you're just stuck between a rock and a hard place. So I realize that this is a strategy. Robert Kiyosaki talks about it all the time, and he is absolutely enamored with debt. I'm just really debt averse, and I think most people in the stacking community are. I realize there's a few high flyers, a few wheeler dealers, and some of them do very well. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that in a derogatory fashion. I'm just saying there are some who are not quite as risk averse as most of the people in this particular community are. And so for them to pledge their silver or their gold makes sense to them. If it makes sense in your circumstance, by all means do it. Go talk to your loan officer, find out what they have to offer. Talk to your accountant and find out what tax advantages you would have for doing so, as opposed to selling your silver and either paying a capital gains on that, or if you have your silver and gold as a business, what your taxes and Social Security would be on that. And so that's one area that I've gotten several questions on recently. They're good questions, and I'm not suggesting that it is a bad strategy. I'm just saying it's a bad strategy for me, and therefore I haven't looked into it a whole lot. If you're interested in that, by all means, look into it, but talk to professionals. Talk to a loan officer, find out what they have to offer and the interest rates, as opposed to just selling your silver and paying the taxes and buying it outright. So that's just a few thoughts that I wanted to pass on today. Again, this is Tuesday, the 17th of February. We've got 3 more days this week where there is no physical market in Shanghai. And while the cat's away, the mice will play. So don't be surprised if the banks figure out a way to drive the price down even lower than they already have. But also don't be surprised if they don't do the exact opposite of what you think. They have a way of rolling out of one position into another without us noticing it, and then going in a direction that's different than we suspect. And so you and I really don't know what's going to happen this week. It is a little bit more risky as far as volatility, and so I would keep that in mind. But again, if you don't have to sell anything right now, just sit back and enjoy the ride. If you dollar cost average every month and it goes down a little bit, by all means, dollar cost average. Don't change your plan on that. That's why we dollar cost average in the first place, and it is very much on sale as opposed to what it was this time last month. And so keep all that in mind. I hope this information will help you in some way. I certainly appreciate your watching. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. I'm always interested in your comments, and there have been some really good ones over the last several months. So thank you for that. And thanks to all of you who have subscribed. I really appreciate your support of the channel. But hopefully we'll see you again next time. God bless.